The rain did not fall so much as it was driven, like nails of ice, by a wind that shrieked down from the iron peaks. Kalen pulled the collar of his heavy wool cloak tighter around his neck, the leather stiff and soaked through after 3 days of riding. Beneath him, his horse, distinctively a roan destrier named Cinder, stepped carefully through the sucking mud of the old trade road. This was the northern reach of the realm, a place where the trees grew twisted and the sun was a stranger. Kalen was not a knight in shining plate, but a king's courier, a man of shadows and dust, carrying a seal that opened doors and a sword that ended arguments. He had been sent to find why the border outpost of Oakhaven had ceased its reports. The silence had lasted a month. In the capital, silence was usually interpreted as treason, but out here, amidst the ancient pines and the fog, silence usually meant death. The road ahead curved into a valley of gray mist, swallowing the path whole. Kalen halted Cinder at the ridge overlooking the valley. Below should have been the glow of watchfires, the smell of wood smoke, and the distant clamor of the garrison smithy. Instead, there was only the gray soup of the fog and an unnerving stillness. The wind, which had howled at his back for miles, seemed to die the moment it crossed the threshold of the valley. It was as if the air itself was holding its breath. Kalen dismounted, his boots sinking into the wet earth with a squelch that sounded obscenely loud in the quiet. He patted Cinder's neck, feeling the animal's tremors. Horses knew before men did. There was no smell of rot, which was a mercy, but there was a scent of ozone, like the air after a lightning strike, sharp and metallic. He loosened the longsword in its scabbard, the oiled steel sliding noiselessly against the leather. He led the horse forward on foot, stepping off the road and into the tree line to approach the outpost unseen. The outpost gate stood wide open. It was a sturdy structure of iron-banded oak, usually manned by 2 guards at all hours. Kalen approached with his back to the rough stone wall, sliding closer, inch by inch. He peered around the frame. The courtyard was visible, lit by the ghostly pale light filtering through the clouds. A guard stood by the water trough. Kalen held his breath, waiting for the man to turn, to cough, to shift his weight. But the guard did not move. Kalen stepped into the open, weapon raised. Still nothing. As he drew closer, the horror of the situation settled into his gut. The guard was not dead, nor was he alive. His skin had turned to a substance like gray slate, his eyes open but unseeing, calcified into stone. The water in the trough was frozen, not with ice, but as a solid sculpture of splashing liquid, caught in the exact second of impact. Time had not just stopped here, it had hardened. Kalen moved through the outpost, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. Every soul in the garrison was the same. The blacksmith was statuesque at his anvil, hammer raised, the sparks from the hot iron frozen in the air like suspended rubies. A serving girl in the mess hall was caught pouring ale, the liquid a golden, solid arc connecting pitcher to tankard. It was a tableau of life interrupted, a museum of the mundane turned terrifying. Kalen touched the arm of a sergeant he had known years ago. The stone was cold, colder than the winter air, leaching the heat from his fingertips. He pulled back instinctively. This was old magic, the kind of magic the priesthood claimed had been purged during the Age of Ash. They were wrong. The king had feared a rebellion, a shifting of banners. He had not feared this. How does one fight an enemy that steals the very moments of your life? Kalen realized he was holding his breath again, afraid that inhaling the stagnant air would turn his own lungs to granite. Leaving the outpost was harder than entering. The instinct to stay and help, to try and wake them, warred with the survivalist logic that had kept Kalen alive for 40 years. He mounted Cinder again, but the horse refused to go deeper into the valley toward the city of Oakhaven proper. The animal reared, eyes rolling white. Kalen cursed softly and dismounted. He unbuckled the saddlebags, slinging them over his own shoulder, and slapped the horse's flank. "Go," he whispered. Back to the ridge. Cinder did not hesitate, galloping away into the mist, the sound of hooves fading quickly. Kalen was alone now. The city of Oakhaven lay 3 miles further in, the heart of this cursed region. If the outpost was frozen, the city would be the center of the storm. He adjusted his sword belt, checked his daggers, and began to walk down the silent road, the mud sucking at his boots. the only sound in a world that had forgotten how to speak. The journey to the city walls was a trek through a nightmare. The weeping forest, named for the way the moss dripped water, was now the sleeping forest. Birds hung in the sky, suspended against the gray clouds like ornaments. Kalen walked beneath a hawk that was locked in a dive, its talons extended, feathers ruffled by a wind that no longer blew. He had to duck to avoid walking into a deer that was mid-leap across the path. The creature's eyes were wide, panicked, turned to quartz. Kalen felt a profound sense of trespass. He was a moving variable in a static equation. The silence was heavy, a physical weight pressing against his eardrums. He began to talk to himself, just a murmur, reciting the names of the taverns in the capital, just to prove that sound still existed. The Red Lion, the Broken Wheel, the Maiden's Fancy. His voice sounded flat and dead, absorbed instantly by the moss and the stone trees. The walls of Oakhaven loomed out of the fog, 50 feet of gray granite that merged seamlessly with the overcast sky. The banners on the ramparts were stiff boards of fabric, rippling in a wind that had died weeks ago. The portcullis was up. Kalen stopped at the bridge spanning the dry moat. There were refugees here, families who had tried to flee. They were clustered on the bridge, a traffic jam of statues. A mother clutching a bundle to her chest, her face twisted in a permanent scream. A cart driver whipping his oxen. Kalen had to squeeze past them, his cloak brushing against the cold, hard stone of their clothes. He tried not to look at their faces, but their expressions were etched with a terror that transcended the medium. They had seen something before the change took them. They had seen the wave coming. Kalen's hand trembled as he gripped the hilt of his sword. What good was steel against this? Inside the city, the scale of the catastrophe was overwhelming. Oakhaven was a trade hub, usually bustling with merchants from the coast and miners from the peaks. Now, the market square was a labyrinth of the lost. Kalen walked past stalls where fishmongers held up stone trouts, where coin changers counted stone gold. The colors were muted, everything covered in a fine layer of gray dust that wasn't dust at all, but the residue of the magic. He moved toward the inner keep, the citadel of the oak. If there was an answer, it would be there. The local lord, Baron Vane, was a scholar of the arcane. Had he done this, a ritual gone wrong, or was he the first victim? Kalen navigated the frozen crowd, his boots crunching on the cobblestones. He felt watched, not by the statues, but by the shadows that seemed to stretch too long in the dim light. Kalen reached the steps of the citadel. The great doors, carved with the history of the realm, were blasted inward. Splinters of wood, frozen in mid-explosion, hung in the entryway like a deadly archway. Kalen carefully stepped through the floating debris, testing the air with his hand. Inside, the temperature dropped further. The great hall was ahead. He walked down the corridor, the tapestries on the walls frozen mid-flutter. He sensed a vibration now, a low thrumming that he felt in his teeth rather than heard with his ears. It was a rhythmic pulse. Thump, thump. Like a heartbeat. It was coming from the throne room. He drew a dagger in his left hand, matching the sword in his right. He was a master of skirmishes, of quick, dirty fights in the mud. He was not prepared for high magic, but he was too stubborn to turn back. The throne room of Oakhaven was a cavern of shadows. At the far end upon the dais sat Baron Vane. He was not stone. This was the first anomaly Kalen had seen. The Baron was slumped on his throne, his skin pale and translucent, veins tracing black webs across his face. He looked desiccated, drained of fluid and life, but he was flesh. Floating above him, rotating slowly, was an object. A crystal shard, jagged and pulsating with a violet light that hurt the eyes. The light washed over the room in waves, and with every pulse, the thump reverberated through the floor, the source of the silence, the anchor of the curse. Kalen stepped forward, his boots clicking loudly on the marble. "Vane," he called out. The name echoed, hollow and mocking. The Baron did not stir. The crystal spun faster. Kalen approached the dais, shielding his eyes from the violet glare. The cold here was absolute. Frost formed on his eyelashes. He needed to shatter it. That was the soldier's logic. If it glows and hums, break it. He gripped his sword with both hands, measuring the distance. But before he could strike, a sound stopped him. A scrape, a small scuffing noise of leather against stone. It didn't come from the Baron. It came from behind a heavy velvet curtain to the right of the throne. Kalen spun around, sword point leveling at the drapery. "Show yourself," he growled, his voice raspy. The curtain moved, not frozen. It rippled. A small hand appeared, gripping the fabric. Then, a face. A child. A girl, no older than 10, with wide, terrified eyes and hair the color of straw. She was alive. "Don't touch it," the girl whispered. Her voice was tiny, a fragile thing in the vast hall, but it hit Kalen like a shout. He lowered his sword slightly. "Who are you?" he asked, keeping one eye on the spinning crystal. "Alara," she said, stepping out fully. She was dressed in the fine clothes of a noble, now torn and stained with soot. "If you touch it, the shadows will wake up." Kalen looked from the girl to the crystal. "The shadows?" he asked. "The silence isn't empty," Alara said, hugging her arms around herself. "It keeps them asleep, but the stone is cracking. When it breaks, they won't be frozen anymore. They will be hungry." As if on cue, a hairline fracture appeared on the surface of the violet crystal with a sharp clink. The pulse of light faltered. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to detach themselves from the walls. "We need to leave," Kalen said, sheathing his sword and grabbing the girl's hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong, her hand warm against his calloused palm, the only warmth in the city. "My father," she looked back at the corpse on the throne. "He tried to stop it. He used the stone to freeze the demons, but it froze everything else too." Kalen pulled her toward the door. "He bought time. We're not going to waste it." They ran for the entrance. The thump of the crystal was erratic now, like a dying heart. As they crossed the threshold of the great hall, a sound echoed from the darkness behind them, a screech. Not human, not animal, the sound of metal tearing. The shadows were waking up. Kalen didn't look back. He scooped Alara up into his arms and sprinted. They burst out into the market square. The gray light of the sky was darkening, turning a bruised purple. The statue people stood as witnesses to their flight. "They are coming!" Alara screamed, burying her face in Kalen's cloak. Kalen risked a glance behind. The darkness was spilling out of the citadel gates like oil. It flowed over the ground, moving faster than a horse. Where it touched the stone statues, they didn't wake up. They crumbled into dust, their essence consumed. "Hold on tight," Kalen growled. He vaulted over a frozen cart, his boots slipping on the cobblestones. He needed to get to the bridge. If they could cross the water, even the dry moat, maybe the ancient wards of the city limits would hold the shadows back. Or maybe he was just running toward a different kind of grave. Kalen's lungs burned. He was strong, but sprinting in full gear with a child was taxing. They reached the city gates. The traffic jam of statues on the bridge was a barricade. He couldn't squeeze through with the girl in his arms fast enough. "Climb," he ordered, setting her down at the base of a maintenance ladder leading to the ramparts. "Up the wall, run along the top, meet me on the other side of the moat." Alara hesitated. "Go," Kalen roared, drawing his sword and turning to face the oncoming tide of darkness. He had to buy her 30 seconds. He pulled a flask of oil from his belt, bit the cork off, and splashed it in a semicircle on the stones in front of him. He struck his flint against his steel guard. A spark. The oil roared into a wall of flame. The fire was a paltry shield against the darkness, but the shadows recoiled, hissing. They hated the light. Kalen stood firm, his sword reflecting the flames. The mass of shadow began to form shapes. Wolves, great cats, twisted humanoid forms, all made of swirling black smoke and razor edges. One lunged. Kalen sidestepped, swinging his blade. The steel passed through the smoke, but the fire on the blade seared the entity. It shrieked and dissolved. But there were too many. "Kalen!" Alara's voice called from the ramparts above. She was safe for the moment. He had to move. He threw the empty flask at the mass, creating a momentary flare-up, and turned, sprinting for the small sally port door to the right of the main gate. He slammed it shut behind him and bolted it. Kalen scrambled up the spiral stairs of the gatehouse, his boots ringing on the stone. He burst out onto the ramparts. Alara was there, huddled by a ballista. Below them, the darkness was consuming the fire, flowing against the gate like a rising tide. "Jump," Kalen said, looking over the outer wall. The moat was dry, filled with tall grass, a 20-foot drop. "I can't," she sobbed. Kalen didn't argue. He grabbed a coil of rope from the ballista station, tied it rapidly around a merlin, and wrapped the other end around his waist. He grabbed the girl. "We don't have a choice." He stepped off the ledge. They fell, the rope burning his hands as he controlled the descent, jerking to a halt 5 feet above the grass. He cut the rope and they dropped the rest of the way, rolling in the dirt. They scrambled out of the moat and ran for the tree line. The weeping forest was waiting. Kalen didn't stop until they were a mile deep into the woods, under the cover of the frozen pines. He collapsed against a tree, gasping for air. Alara slid down beside him, her face streaked with tears and grime. They were alive. But as Kalen looked back toward Oakhaven, his relief turned to ice. The gray fog that shrouded the valley was changing. It was churning, turning a deep, bruised violet. The silence was breaking. A deep, resonant boom echoed from the city, shaking the ground. The crystal had shattered, the time stop was over, and whatever had been trapped inside was now free. Kalen looked at the girl. She was shivering, staring at the beam of light piercing the sky. "It's awake," she whispered. Kalen nodded grimly. He stood up, his legs heavy, and offered her his hand. "Then we have to be faster." He looked north toward the mountains, toward the High King's seat. He had come to deliver a message, but now he carried a warning that might save the world, or end it. The silence of Oakhaven had been broken, but the scream was just beginning. Kalen hoisted Alara onto his back. "Hold on," he said. The first drops of rain began to fall again, but this time the rain was black. They moved through the forest, the unnatural stillness now replaced by a chaotic awakening. The wind returned with a vengeance, howling through the branches. The frozen birds fell from the sky, thumping against the ground, dead from the shock of time restarting. The stone deer shattered as they tried to move stiff limbs. It was a cacophony of destruction. Kalen shielded Alara from the falling debris. They needed to find Cinder. The horse was their only chance of outrunning the spreading corruption. Kalen whistled, a sharp, piercing sound that cut through the wind. He waited. A moment later, a whinny echoed from the ridge. The beast had stayed. Loyalty, Kalen thought, was a rare currency these days. They reached the ridge where he had left the horse. Cinder was there, pacing nervously, eyes wide with fear but holding ground. Kalen wasted no time. He swung into the saddle and pulled Alara up in front of him. "Ha!" He kicked the horse into a gallop. They hit the trade road, the mud flying behind them. They were riding away from Oakhaven, but Kalen could feel the pressure on his back, a physical weight of malevolence. The violet light in the sky was expanding, coloring the clouds, turning the day into a bruised twilight. The shadows were not just in the city anymore. They were bleeding into the sky. As they rode, Alara spoke, her voice shouting over the wind. "My father said the silence was a lock, but he didn't have the key. He said the key was in the west." Kalen gritted his teeth. The west meant the sunken coast, a place of pirates and witches. "Why there?" he shouted back. "The architect," she cried. "The one who built the crystal. He lives in the drowned tower." Kalen's blood ran cold. The architect was a myth, a boogeyman from nursery rhymes. If he was real, and if he had built the device that froze a city, then the stakes had just risen from a kingdom's problem to a god's game. "Then we go west," Kalen said, "after we survive this." The road ahead was blocked. A massive oak tree, ancient and rotten, had fallen across the path, brought down by the sudden return of the wind. Cinder skidded to a halt. Kalen cursed. The thicket on either side was too dense for the horse. They were trapped. Behind them, the violet fog was rolling over the trees, dissolving the needles and bark into gray sludge. "We have to jump it," Kalen said, though he knew it was too high. "Cinder can't make that," Alara said. "He has to." Kalen backed the horse up, turning him around to gain distance. He patted the wet neck. "For the king, boy. For the girl." He turned the horse back toward the log and dug his heels in. Cinder charged. The hooves thundered on the packed earth. Kalen leaned forward, becoming one with the animal. The log loomed, covered in slick moss. At the last second, Cinder launched. It was a leap born of terror and muscle. They soared through the air, time seeming to slow down for Kalen again. For a heartbeat, they were flying. Then, impact. Cinder landed hard on the other side, stumbling, knees buckling. Kalen fought to keep them upright, hauling on the reins. The horse recovered, finding its footing, and surged forward again. Kalen risked a look back. The log was gone, swallowed by the violet fog. They rode until the violet glow faded to a dull throb on the horizon. The rain cleared, leaving a cold, starry night. They were in the foothills now, miles from the cursed valley. Kalen slowed Cinder to a walk. The horse was foaming, exhausted. Kalen spotted a cave overhang near a stream, a ranger's stash he had used years ago. "We stop here," he said, his voice ragged. He helped Alara down. She looked small and frail in the moonlight. "Are we safe?" she asked. Kalen looked at the distant glow in the sky. "No," he said honestly, "but we are alive." Kalen made a small fire, just enough to boil water. He offered Alara a piece of dried venison. She ate it ravenously. "You said the architect is in the west," Kalen said, sitting across from her. "What is the crystal, Alara, truly?" The girl stared into the flames. "It's a prison," she said softly. "My father found it in the mines. He thought it was a power source, but it was a cage, and he opened the door." She looked up, her eyes reflecting the fire. "Whatever was inside, it eats sound, it eats time, and now it's hungry for the world." Kalen leaned back against the rock. The gravity of it settled on him. He was a courier. He delivered letters. Now he was escorting the only witness to an apocalypse, hunting for a mythical builder to fix a broken magical prison. He laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "The king is going to hang me for being late," he muttered. He looked at his sword, the edge chipped from the stone statues he had struck. He would need better steel. He would need allies. But for now, he had a tired horse and a frightened child. "Sleep," Kalen ordered. "We ride at dawn." Alara curled up on his spare blanket. "Will you stay awake?" she asked. "Someone has to watch the dark," Kalen said. He watched her until her breathing evened out. Then he turned his gaze outward toward the dark expanse of the plains. The world was sleeping, unaware that a cancer was growing in its heart. He took out a piece of parchment and a charcoal stick. He began to write, not a report, but a testament. If they died tomorrow, someone had to know what happened at Oakhaven. The night deepened. Kalen's eyes grew heavy, but a sound snapped him awake. A rustle in the brush. He kicked snow over the fire, plunging the cave into darkness. He drew his dagger. The noise came closer. Not a shadow monster. This sounded like boots, heavy boots. "I know you're there, Ranger," a voice rasped from the dark, "and I know what you have." A figure stepped into the moonlight, a mercenary, clad in mismatched plate, holding a crossbow, and behind him, two more, bounty hunters, or scavengers. "Hand over the girl," the leader said. "We heard there's a price on the survivor of Oakhaven." Kalen stood up slowly, stepping between the men and the sleeping girl. He didn't look at the crossbow, he looked at the leader's eyes. "You have no idea what you're asking for," Kalen said, his voice low and dangerous. "Walk away and you live." The leader laughed, raising the bow. "I don't think so, old man." Kalen gripped his sword hilt. The shadows were a nightmare, but men he could kill. He exhaled slowly, the breath pluming in the cold air. The curse had started a war, but the first battle would be fought right here, in the dirt. Kalen drew his steel.